I'll bet you haven't thought about the spine as a tool of self-expression and a limiter of your self-expression. It is fascinating when you get into this. So let's think about it. So the spine has many gifts: function, movement, emotion or behavior, sense of self, expression, and consciousness. And when you think about expression, it is 55% of our communication is body language. Another way of thinking about that is that every thought and feeling that you have is expressed through the body via the spine, and that shows up as our posture. And it's so important that it's 55% of our body language. In fact, this process of our sense of self in our body is reflected very much in our posture, so much that intuitively we know it. When we see somebody acting very authentically, we can see it. We see it through their postural communication. And when we see somebody feeling signs of discomfort or a sense of uncertainty beyond what they know, which is another way of saying, this is not something that I see myself as, when we see that, we visually know it. And we also know when somebody is really embodying their truth. We can see it in them through their body language. Neurological patterning that develop in our nervous system sustain our body and also sustain our emotional tendencies. So what we do and don't do, what we allow, what we don't allow, what we feel, what we don't allow ourselves to feel, are essentially defined by the environment that we live in. So think family, culture, what is safe, what's not safe. All of these things create neurological patterns of behavior within us that feel very uncomfortable and even trigger our sympathetic nervous system when we stretch beyond them. These neurological patterns define the stories and rules that we live our life by, our sense of self. So as we go through our life, the rules and patterns that we unconsciously accept define the structure of our nervous system. Because what happens is we have a range of motion, of feeling, a range of thought, a range of physical movement. And because of that matrix between thought, feeling, and the body through posture, we end up essentially, you could think of it like this: the trail in the wood that is more trodden, the path that you take, and the paths that you don't take anymore grow back in. The ones that you take are well trodden. So that ends up being the structure of that nervous system. And so we end up limiting the ranges beyond that. And the ranges beyond that feel very unsafe. Going back to that hiking analogy, if you're walking through the woods and you veer off a path and you notice that it's overgrown, you start to feel, maybe this isn't such a good idea. If nothing else, there's a sense of uncertainty. Think of it this way. So our neurological patterns that end up, that we define, begin in the womb. In fact, we entrain to our mother, and what we're really entraining to is our mother's sense of safety, what her environment is, her stress levels, her health levels, all of those things end up beginning the patterning within our nervous system. As we develop this sense of self in our spine, the lines are clearly defined. So the lines are demarcated by a sense of discomfort when we veer too far outside of our comfort zone, or another way of saying it, out of our sense of self, a place that we know ourselves well. And feelings of great safety or a sense of homeness when we are really seated and anchored in the things that we do or the places where we feel most like ourselves. And so this creates a boundary that we tend to veer within, things that we like versus things that make us not feel so comfortable, or things we don't like. And what's really fascinating about this is that these patterns are ultimately anchored and crystallized within our spine. So the longer we essentially live within these boundaries, the more those tensions and formations and distortions in the spine become anchored and crystallized in. And so intuitively, we understand this process because we understand body language. So very clearly, you can look at someone's body language and understand so much about what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and what their intentions are. It is, in fact, 55% of communication. So as we develop this sense of self, how it ends up being influenced or anchored in the spine is that it's anchored through these neuroreflexive circuits. And essentially those lines are felt, those demarcated lines are felt by discomfort when we veer too far from our sense of self, or feelings of safety or homeness when we're really anchored within ourselves. And so over time, these patterns become very crystallized within our neural skeleton. And so over time, if we don't stretch who we are, stretch what we are, the defensive patterning in the spine has very specific points of tension, and they pull us forward, and they actually unload our spine and make it harder to move within gravity. So it behooves us, not just because we have a greater life when we always expand our sense of self and who we are, but it also opens up and expands our spine so that our spine, the structural, just the muscular, skeletal, physical aspect of us, of what we are, becomes stronger and more healthy. So what this neural reflexive circuit is a relationship between our mind, our emotion, and our posture. And so as we experience things, we feel that in our body, our posture moves. So what's going on there when our posture becomes unloaded? Because here's the truth. It is easiest for your spine and for the energy of your body to be in a perfectly erect position, perfect posture. Just look at children. It's absolutely perfect. But as we develop our neural skeleton and sense of self, when we learn to live with a sense of lack of safety or defense, and we walk through life in that way, which is ubiquitous with modern living in a lot of ways, we end up developing a lot of tension at very specific areas in the spine. And over time, those areas of tension become crystallized and lock our spine into a distortion. And it becomes harder to change our sense of self, and it becomes more like we stimulate the lack of safety when we expand beyond what we've always been. In a way, this creates this sense of self, when it gets locked into the spine, creates a feedback loop. Because if you think about it, that matrix between thought, mind, and posture programs neurology, but also influences the structure of our posture. But it also sends a signal back to the brain and back to the feeling of our body of this is our reality. So our posture actually influences our thoughts and our emotions. And if you want to know more about that, I suggest watching Amy Cuddy's TED Talk, where she delved into a study they did on power postures. You might remember Stand in Wonder Woman for 5 minutes, and you'll feel the feelings of empowerment, of personal empowerment. So when you've got the posture that's related to a smallness or a shame feeling, it's actually telling your brain that that's what your experience, that's what your reality of self is. Have you ever noticed how your body or your posture changes in response to meeting somebody, especially meeting somebody really important? If you've ever met a hero, you might have had this experience. And if this isn't something that you can directly relate to, you can definitely see it in children. When you meet a young child, that child's looking up to this big adult, and you can see in their posture, they get small, they instantly react. So that right there is a very clear example of what's always happening whenever you have those thoughts and feelings of timidness, of bashfulness. So I'll tell you an experience about when I met somebody who wasn't exactly my idol, but it was definitely a larger-than-life person when I met Whitney Houston. Very, very briefly, I was working at a recording studio at the time, and I knew that she was coming in, and I was working at the front desk as an intern. And I buzzed her in, she pressed the little intercom button, and, I said, "Studio," and she said, "It's Whitney." So I hit the button, and Whitney came on in, and she just walked right past me with her sunglasses on like a boss and said to me, "Hey, baby." And instantly I just kind of was just like this in my chair, oh, hi, you know, and she wasn't even an idol of mine, but it was just something that just instantly was just like, oh, wow, Whitney Houston. And, you know, before I knew it, I had this little boy posture going on. So these patterns that end up in our spine essentially are defense physiology. They are physiology that sets us up for an expected reality that we need, a demand that we need to meet. And they only become a problem when they end up either limiting ourselves or actually influencing the function of our nervous system. And so a lot of times that structure becomes so intense that it affects specific nerves that come out of the spine that have specific functions, or it inhibits back muscles and causes back pain, or muscles going into the brain or into the skull causing or pulling down on the spinal cord causing headaches. There's a lot of things that can go on there. So when these things become dysfunctional, really we've been operating without movement and without change for far too long. These defense postures in the spine become a problem is really when they limit our sense of freedom, who we want to be, our ability to self-actualize, what we feel, what we think, and also how we move our bodies. And so what ends up happening is when things in the body, whether it's mind, emotion, or physical, become stuck for too long, they become too stable, and we actually develop symptoms as a result of that. And that's usually what causes somebody to break away and seek help. So when I end up seeing people in my office, it really is because something has been ignored for far too long, whether that be anxiety or stress or a limit to their sense of don't know what to do, they don't know how to move on, they feel stuck in life, or physical pains, or dysfunctional things that happen in the digestive system or sleep or any other thing associated with a neurospinal dysfunction. You can really think of these defense patterns as something really, a very powerful tool for helping you get through life. You can think of it like a suit of armor or a mask. So this armor helps protect us and helps us lock into a specific way of being that takes less energy to be that way because we're already ready for that, or a specific mask that allows us to play the roles that we need to in our life. But what happens when we want to move beyond that? Much like a crab needs to molt their shell, you start to expand on the inside and you start to push up against that threshold of armor or that mask or that shell, and you begin to feel the pains of feeling stuck, of feeling like you can't break through to the next level and not knowing why something is inaccessible to you. Nature loves to repeat itself. So the crab analogy really works well. That neurospinal pattern is a protective shell for you. It helps you be what you need to be and do what you need to do to survive the place you are in the world, in life, until you get to a certain point of maturity where you have enough wisdom to where you say, I know what I want to do, I know how I want to actualize myself, I know what I want to do and what I want to be in the world. And so how do you get from here to there? And the answer is you have to have enough energy and will and trust to do so. Usually at this point in care when people are feeling stuck, the point where they want to move beyond the sense of self that they've always been, their spine, their mind, their emotions, all of it is locked in a specific way of being. Usually when they come on in, what's happening is they're getting their sympathetics triggered, because when you stretch those nerves that are creating that binding tension for that defense physiology, when that nerve begins to stretch, it's stimulating those parts of your brain, those parts of your emotion that are all interrelated, and it stimulates the fight or anger part of your nervous system, and that becomes more alive and more prominent. You become more irritable, more intolerant, and then also it stimulates the part of the flight side of the sympathetic nervous system, which is more about fear. It's about running away, it's about hiding, it's about pulling back and shrinking. And we start to stretch into it and feel those emotions come and go. And usually what ends up happening is as that goes, you're also stimulating and recruiting parts of your spine that are wanting to move while other parts can't move. And a lot of times when somebody's doing this, they might be stepping into the gym. So when all this comes together, you have a little bit of a perfect storm. It ends up triggering a lot of the sympathetics, which inhibit all of the rest and digest healing functions of the body. And you end up having like really facilitated and really depressed parts of your skeleton. So people are pulling muscles or injuring themselves in ways that they didn't previously. So when you reach that point where everything seems like it's starting to pull back, it's actually a time to lean in. But how do you jump to that next level? That's a beautiful thing that shows up in network spinal care. This point in care we call transform care. And so the first part of care, that discover portion of care, is really all about helping the body to adapt and integrate and be with and get to feel connected to again where you're binding that tension. So if you have a tension that's here, and this is your sense of self, it's pulling your posture in this way, and it has a subsequent effect on the brain and the feelings, and you can kind of get a sense for, if you saw my posture like this as opposed to this, you get a sense for maybe what those thoughts or feelings are. And so as we work on the tension that's in the body that might be causing the back pain or the headaches that they're experiencing, and what happens is we're actually connecting the brain back up to this, because this area, if this has been your sense of self, kind of like a fish in the water doesn't feel the water, anything constant your nervous system blocks out. So you're no longer feeling this. Your brain's no longer telling you that this tension is here. It's just, yep, this is my spine. It feels really uncomfortable to do perfect posture. I feel like I feel awkward, challenged a sense of self. And if you do this long enough, it actually stimulates your sympathetic response. So we get the body to get to know this area and choose on its own to let that go. And what ends up happening is, for people under care, is, yeah, the back pain's going away, doc, the headaches are going away, but also I'm noticing I'm having more energy. I sleep better. I feel more at ease. I feel less irritability. And these are all because that stretch is no longer happening, and that ease is actually integrating into the body. And so there's more safety around the ranges of what that sense of self is, because the body's always pushing up against that when it's encountering stress. So that's starting to open up and find ease. Well, when you get to what we call transform care or mid-transform care, that's because the body has had enough ease where now it's really starting to push beyond some of those like the limits of what those anchors are, and truly resolve those tensions and allow the body and spine and mind and feeling, the whole being and the whole sense of self, to expand beyond the limited range or that shell, that cocoon. That is really the moment where we start to push up against the shell. So at first it's about getting comfortable and getting more connected to what's there, and at some point we become more intolerant to the way that we've always been, and we push up against that. And that is a really powerful point in network spinal care. And that's really where this work starts to become much more about transformation and self-actualization. So at this point in care, it's a lot like a baby bird leaving the nest. And think about all the analogies in life: the butterfly, the cocoon, and the caterpillar, right? The crab molting the shell. And the bird getting to the point where it gets thrown out of the nest because it's too uncomfortable for the bird. It's too uncomfortable to think about going over the edge. It wants to stay in the nest, but when it drops and is faced with this fall, that triggers the nervous system to move out the wings, and all of a sudden the bird knows, and it's a reflex, knows that, hey, I can fly. So we are built to expand. We're built to grow. It is a part of what we are. It's in the epigenetic code of our genes. It's in the neuroplasticity of our nervous system. And it's in our spirit. Because when we don't grow, we get really disenchanted with life. And all of the negative feelings and bitterness starts to seep in. So we need to expand. So doesn't it make sense that our spine, when it starts to feel that shell, when it starts to feel like this has been stuck too long and it doesn't feel any good, that there's this whole mechanism that allows us to build up enough energy and break through to that next level. So whenever somebody starts to reach that mid-transform point in care and they start to push and breathe into those stretch receptors, it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system, instead of dropping into fight and flight, is met with this feeling, this determination of change. And when that happens, that creates an expanded amount of energy in the system, and that energy is absolutely necessary to create the change in the body. So when the right energy and the right information meet, change instantly and effortlessly happens. And that is the nature of nature. That is the magic of nature. And that really is what makes network spinal care so incredibly powerful, is because we are working with something that is already a part of you. This is how your system does change. This is how your system does expansion. And so if what you're looking for is not just symptom relief, but you know what? I see the total nature of this. I see how these symptoms are a reflex of how I'm not living the life that I want to live. And I want to change that. And I want to step into more of myself. And I want to honor that process. That's why network spinal care is for you.